Welcome to the Access Live. Please hold while we connect you to your Access Live event. You are now being connected to the Access Live event as a host. Please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kelly Nardi with the City of Littleton. Thank you for joining us for our live interactive telephone town hall. We are very sorry about the delay. There were some technical issues, but we're really glad to have you with us. I showed that there are 223 people who are listening right now, and we definitely want to hear from you tonight. We are hosting this event to give our citizens the chance to speak directly with Police Chief Doug Stevens, and to answer your questions about police operations, policies, training, and tools. We want to take as many questions as we can on this live event, and if we need to, we'll stick around a little bit later than we had planned to after 7:30. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your phone keypad at any time, and you will be placed in line to speak with a member of our staff. They will take down your name and the neighborhood that you live in. The next time you hear your name, you'll be live on the call, and you'll be able to ask your question directly. If you are streaming this event on our website, you can simply type your name and question below the streaming player. We expect to receive a lot of questions tonight, so if we're not able to address yours, please leave a voicemail after the event at 303-795-3811 or email us at littletontownhall.org. Again, if you have questions throughout the event, please press *3 on your keypad or type them below the streaming player. I'm pleased to welcome our panelists, our City Manager Mark Ralph, Police Chief Doug Stevens, and Division Chiefs Gene Enley and Andy Smith. Thanks for being here. We also have Mayor Pro Tem Scott Malin in the council chamber, and other members of the City Council we know are watching from home. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce Mayor Jerry Valdez to share a few thoughts. Mayor?
Thank you, Kelly. I'd like to welcome everyone on the phone, viewing on our website, on our social media, and cable Channel 8 for joining us for our first-of-a-kind event. We are fortunate to live in a wonderful community with a low crime rate and citizens who support our police department and one another. But we know there is always room for improvements, and for that reason, we want to hear from you. I would like to express my appreciation to our city manager, our police chief, and the division chiefs for their interest in making Littleton an even better community. I look forward to hearing your questions and your comments. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to remind everyone that our telephone town hall is designed to be inclusive and civil. We will get to as many questions as time allows, so we ask that you are succinct in order to give as many people as possible the opportunity to participate. Comments that stray off topic or that are disrespectful will not be tolerated. So let's get started. Every police department is unique. No two are alike. Law enforcement agencies are very different than they were 20 or even 10 years ago. The best police departments adapt to their community's culture and needs. At this time, I'd like to ask Chief Stevens to provide us an overview of the LPD and describe some of the services it provides. Chief Stevens.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks, Mayor and Councilman and everyone else that's joining us here today, City Manager Ralph and Division Chief Smith and Enley. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk with the community here in Littleton and provide a little bit more transparency to what we have going on. I think it's a great opportunity for me and for us as members of law enforcement to provide an accurate and true, unfiltered assessment of where we're at with law enforcement and what we're doing as a profession, and specifically here in Littleton. A brief overview of Littleton Police Department. Littleton obviously is about for folks who don't know, is about 14 square miles. About 45,000 residents live in Littleton. Littleton Police Department is comprised of 108 professional men and women, 79 of which are sworn, which means they're traditional law enforcement officers, can make arrests or serve as detectives. And we have a number of different support personnel that do everything from dispatch to crime scene techs to administrative assistants, and we're a full-service police department. We handle approximately 80,000 incoming 911 calls or non-emergency calls per year. Our officers respond on approximately 56 to 57,000 calls where we actually go out and have contact with the public every single year. So we're very busy. As the mayor said, though, we are very fortunate. We live in a wonderful community. As all Littleton community residents know, we enjoy a very low crime rate, very safe and cohesive community.
All right, thank you, Chief Stevens. A reminder to everybody on the phone, I see there are 421 of you. You can press *3 at any time on your keypad, and you'll get in the queue to ask a question. Before we had some technical difficulties, Sam had submitted several questions from our website. So let's just get started and go to a few of those. Sam asked, what % of contacts result in use of force?
It's a great question, Sam, and I'm sure a lot of people are wondering about use of force. We'll probably hear that a lot tonight. So as I said, our officers actually physically respond on approximately 55,000 calls for service every year. That's a lot of calls, right? A lot of contacts. Of course, not all of those result in some sort of arrest or criminal investigation. A lot of those are service-type calls as well. But of those 55,000 calls, we make custodial arrests on average, where we actually put people in handcuffs and take them to jail for a criminal violation, approximately 1,400, 1,500 times per year. And of those, we average less than 1%, or about 1% of those custodial arrests end up in a documented use of force situation. So about 1% of those calls. So for example, in 2019, we had 14 total use of force incidents in those 55,000 contacts.
All right, thank you. And Sam also asked, how are citizen complaints handled?
It's another good question. We've had some time to look at Sam's questions, so I've been studying up, during the downtime, the technical difficulties, and we apologize for that. Citizen complaints can come in a number of ways. We can take complaints in person. You can contact us online. You can contact us by phone. It's very important for us and for me as the chief of police to understand the job that our officers are doing. And let me just say that we have tremendously professional men and women wearing this uniform, the Littleton Police uniform, and we're very fortunate to be supported so strongly by our community. But there are times when we don't provide the service that is expected, and we need to know about that. So the ways you can make complaints and the way complaints are handled is we would receive that complaint through any of those ways that I talked about, online or in person or on the phone. And then we would assign a supervisor, usually the first line supervisor would investigate that initial complaint. So persons who make complaints would obviously have their information taken by a supervisor, and then we would conduct whichever type of investigation we feel is appropriate. At the end of that investigation, the complainant, the person who made the complaint, would be notified by us as to the outcome of that complaint as well.
All right. The next question, when will we see body-worn cameras on LPD officers?
Another good question, and that is obviously a hot topic across the nation. We've actually, in Littleton, we have been looking at body-worn cameras and we were planning on beginning a pilot program. We're going to test the system right before the pandemic hit. So that kind of put that on hold for a lot of different issues, obviously. But I'm a proponent. I know most law enforcement officers are proponents of body-worn video. We think it provides just another level of transparency for our organization, so folks have the opportunity to see the great work that our folks are doing on a regular basis. And then in those very rare occasions where we have critical incidents, as you see on the news quite often from around the country, it provides a perspective that people can review what's happening and maybe learn from incidents and validate the actions the officers are taking or identify areas where we need to improve. For Littleton, we've been, like I said, looking at the systems. Part of the issues are identification of funding. And currently, with the COVID pandemic, all municipalities are feeling a little bit of a budget pinch. But we are going to be moving forward on a body-worn video. It's a state law right now. It just got passed recently with the police reform bill. And we are required to be wearing body-worn video by July 1 of 2023. Our goal is to do it before then. Once we do due diligence in identifying a vendor, identifying funding sources, there are a lot of grant opportunities out there that we're looking for now because we want to be very responsible with the taxpayers' money, but we want to provide a good system that is useful for us and useful for the public as well. So no later than January 1, 2023, or July 1, 2023, I can promise that, but hopefully much sooner, probably realistically in 2022.
All right, thank you. We have Sandy on the phone. Sandy is in the Kettering Park neighborhood. Can we go ahead and have you ask your question, Sandy?
Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Oh, are you there, Sandy?
Yes, I am. What do I do? Unmute?
Sandy, I think we can hear you. Just go for it. I love your background.
Oh, okay. All right, good. So it seems like we've increasingly relied on law enforcement to handle addiction, alcohol, poverty issues, all kinds of things that mental health issues that aren't appropriate. Well, I shouldn't say aren't appropriate, but it seems like a stupid way, in my opinion, to handle them. How do we get it back? How do we get an education program that gets it back on the radar that prison isn't the response for addiction and for mental health issues? And is there anything that the city of Littleton can do in that regard?
Well, thank you. And I think that's a question that we're hearing more and more, again, across the country. And of course, we're not immune in Littleton. And you bring up some very good points. Over time, as society has evolved, and I think we've all seen a much greater frequency, at least an awareness of mental health and larger social issues that aren't traditionally law enforcement responses. We've seen an increase in awareness of those things. And I think law enforcement has become more and more involved in those things over time because, frankly, people don't know who else to call, right? So when they're dealing with a situation, whether it's homelessness or whether it's someone having a mental crisis, a mental health crisis, or even anything from, we've gone on all kinds of non-criminal type things where people need assistance. You pick up the phone and you call the number you know to call, right? Which usually responds or results in a law enforcement response. And honestly, we have not been very good at law enforcement in handling those situations because you're right, we're not trained in a lot of that stuff professionally to the same level that a social service worker is or a mental health professional would be trained. So we've identified over the last several years areas where we can do better. And one of those areas would be in mental health response. We deal with a lot of folks that are going through some sort of mental health crises. And our traditional law enforcement responses, again, have not been great. We had been trained in a lot of different traditional tactics and things. But over the last several years, I think our profession in general, and specifically here in Littleton, we've done a great job of enhancing our training on mental health awareness and response. A couple programs specifically for mental health would be, we have what we call the crisis intervention teams training, which is not a Littleton thing, it's a nationwide thing, but it's a very comprehensive and intense training that every single one of our officers and 911 dispatchers, call takers have been trained. It's a 40-hour heavily scenario-based training class taught by professionals on how officers and dispatchers and folks that have contact with the public can more effectively address and deal with calls where we come in contact with folks experiencing mental health crises. So most departments across the country are struggling to get, because it is a very difficult training class and very time-consuming, 25 to 30% of their patrol personnel is a good mark for them. I'm very proud to say that in Littleton, we've made this a priority over the last several years, and we have 100% of our personnel, our CIT, Crisis Intervention Team, trained and certified, and 100% of our dispatch personnel. So that provides us a little bit of a benefit there. Another program that we're currently very proud of is our co-responder program, which is exactly what you're kind of talking about. Because the police aren't mental health professionals, and we have a limited number of tools that we can use to handle crises. And usually when we handle crises, it's on a short-term basis, right? We're not good at long-term solutions. That's just not what we do well. We're good at short-term solutions. So we partnered with All Health Network, and we have clinical psychologists and mental health professionals that actually ride along with us in our police cars, and they respond to calls with us, and they are able to provide immediate access to services for folks and provide an immediate doorway to those longer term solutions that ultimately will help maybe reduce the likelihood that the police would have contact with these individuals again, because they don't need contact with us. And get them the help that they need. So that's mental health. There's a lot of other issues, social issues, you name it. There's tons of them, and the police go because when at 3 a.m. who else are you going to call? But I think with what's happening in America right now with law enforcement and what's when they're taking a good hard introspective look at the things that we do, and I think that one of the benefits of what's happening now is the identification of other types of calls and responses that aren't traditionally law enforcement related, where we may be able to make other steps and model the co-responder program maybe with social services type individuals. As far as what the city can do, that's a conversation that we're engaged in constantly. I know we have future conversations scheduled to talk with City Council about law enforcement and those types of issues. So I think that through involvement from community members and through the council, I think we can come up with some good plans and some good ideas.
Thank you. I remind our callers on the phone, we have 609 people on the phone, so we thank you for joining us. If you have a question, please press *3, and we'll put you directly in touch with our panelists if you have a question for City Manager Ralph or for Chief Stevens. We have several questions that have come into our live stream, so we'll go to Marley's. Marley asks, how is the police department taking data to track racial disparities, and what actionable steps are they taking to decrease this?
Another great question, and obviously very timely, given the police reform legislation that recently passed. I can tell you that the Littleton Police Department does capture certain data. We had not in the past analyzed specific ethnicity and racial data as a component of our operations. We are doing so now and will be doing so in the future because it's necessary, and we can benefit from capturing that data to make sure that we are policing equitably among all races and ethnicities and genders. So as part of the police reform package, we have modified our data collection techniques. We're currently in the process of working with a regional group of law enforcement agencies to make sure we're all capturing the same things. Part of the legislation, one of the challenges with the legislation is it's fairly ambiguous in what we're looking for. So we're working to identify exactly what folks want us to capture so we capture it accurately. And then once we do that, and as we do that, the reports will be published, and both through the state and then through Littleton PD, we are going to very soon have some additional measures that increase transparency for what we do and maybe answer some of the questions some folks have now, including our policy manual will be available online for anybody to look at all of our policies anytime they want. And then we do a number of reports annually where we analyze everything from use of force. We do analyze bias-based policing annually based on stops and contacts to a certain extent. And as far as the data captured, it's a little different than what the state is requiring. But those will be available online as well. And we'll have a number of reports and analysis available soon so that folks can take a look at what we're doing and bring in questions.
All right. Marley had another question. Why aren't police officers wearing masks when they are on duty in the community, i.e. weekends on Main Street?
That's a good question too. And it's a challenge to, it's like herding cats a little bit. I can tell you that as a chief of police and as a parent of 2 kids as well. But there's some certain situations where officers can't wear masks. I mean, obviously, if there's a situation that would jeopardize safety or anything like that, obviously weekends on Main is not one of those. The officers should be wearing masks. We continually remind them to wear masks. I believe that part of the problem is, and it's a realistic situation where officers are out there, and anybody's been in weekends on Main, it's a wonderful event. But it's kind of hot sometimes, so our personnel wearing their solar panel blue uniforms with the body armor and all the equipment and the heat and being out there for 7 or 8 hours, they're not out there just for dinner. They're out there for a full shift. Sometimes they get pretty hot. So if they've maintained 6 feet of different distance, they're probably okay in removing their masks. But in general, we'd like them to wear those masks, and they're reminded of that constantly.
All right, we've got some great questions coming in. I think we're going to take a phone call now from Chris, who lives in the Coventry neighborhood. Chris, go ahead and ask your question.
In light of the recent Law Force Integrity Act, and Greenwood Village recently came out and they said they would support their officers from civil liability. Do you have plans to go through and support your officers if they should face the same sort of civil liability?
Thanks, Ed. Civil liability is a hot topic too, qualified immunity and where we are with that. And that's a larger question, obviously, for our elected officials on that. But here's where I stand on it, and here's the message I've given to our officers, is that that law changed nothing, in my opinion, as far as how we operate, how they should be operating. I think that, if you look at the way the law is written, and yeah, the lawyers they have differing views because they're trained in the law, but from a common sense law enforcement officer's perspective, if you're acting within the scope of your authority and you're acting within the law, you're covered. And if you're not, you have some personal exposure there. And that's how we've operated forever, And I think if you're acting within the scope of your authority, if you're acting professionally, if you're doing things legally, there's nothing to be concerned about. If you're outside the law, if you're outside the scope of your authority, then yeah, you have some personal exposure, and I don't see anything necessarily wrong with that. I just think that again, the language of how the law is written has caused some concern with some folks and some officers. But for our personnel, the message they're getting from me is this changes nothing. Act professional, act within the law like you do every single day and night out there, and there won't be any issues.
All right. We're going to take another phone call, this time from Les, who lives near the Heritage High School neighborhood. Les, go ahead with your question.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me, Chief?
Yeah, I hear you good. Thanks.
Yeah, I think our police department is terrific. And as a senior citizen, I know a lot of us, we see on television these riots and things that take place, and it's created some fear in us quite a bit. And I just wondered, I wouldn't think this, but I wondered what your police force would do if there was a riot and they got out of hand. Would you stand down and let it run its course or intervene? It's just created a lot of anxiety in a lot of seniors.
Yeah, I understand. And, getting bombarded by the media on those images and videos of that happening all over the country has got to be very disturbing and very challenging for a lot of people. So I can tell you that each situation, I've been in a few of these situations in my career, almost 30 years in law enforcement. I've been in a few of those incidents, and each one's unique and each one's different. So it's hard to tell if there's any standard response to what we have. I can tell you and assure you that we do have plans in place to address whatever type of civil disturbance we may experience. And that's, of course, we're not a large agency, so we require on our neighbors around us to help us out, the county and different jurisdictions, Inglewood and Sheridan and whatnot, and just as we would help them out in the same situation. Obviously, those are rapidly evolving situations. They can be very scary and very frightening. We've trained and do train and as a profession and as a department to handle those the best way we can, the most appropriate way we can. And I can't give you a straight up answer of what we would do in any given situation. It kind of depends, and they're very fluid. We're paid and expected by the community of Littleton to protect and promote the peace. So I think that's our primary responsibility. So we'll do everything we can to maintain order and keep everyone safe.
All righty. We're going to go back to a question that was submitted on the live stream. This is from Jeannie. Jeannie wants to know, are we going to keep allowing panhandling in the medians on busy streets where there are about 8 to 10 feet for the person to stand? I am worried someone is going to get hit by a car and killed.
Another great Littleton question, but not exclusive to Littleton. Thank you, Jeannie. Again, a question for the lawyers and legal experts, but as I understand and has been explained to me in training, and is while that is a very concerning situation for obviously safety reasons, there's also a First Amendment argument there that has been taken to the courts, and especially in Colorado, and there's a state Colorado Supreme Court ruling that restricts our ability to limit that type of behavior because of a First Amendment argument. So while we do our best and we remind folks, to try to stay safe, it is concerning from a safety perspective, and I know a lot of jurisdictions and municipalities are looking at ways to address that. But there's been a very serious legal challenge, and the Supreme Court of Colorado has come down and ruled that we're very restricted in what we can do there, so our hands are tied on that.
All right. We're going to go to a phone caller. This is Terry, who lives in the Columbine neighborhood. Terry, go ahead with your question.
Hi, there's been a lot of debate about police presence in the schools, and I was wondering if there is going to be a police presence to check for weapons. You know, being in the Columbine area, we kind of worry about that because of our history.
Great question. So yes, the Littleton Police Department has a tremendous positive relationship with Littleton Public Schools. We have 79 sworn personnel, and we have 6 of those 79 that are full-time assigned to the middle and high schools in Littleton. And that is at the request of Littleton Public Schools as part of our great partnership that we have with them. We call it the SRO, School Resource Officer Program. So the SROs, I think, are tremendously beneficial in promoting positive relationships between law enforcement and the youth in our community. And I think I can point to numerous times where those relationships, those positive relationships that have been formed have saved lives. And it's not just situations like you're talking about the tragedy at Columbine or Arapahoe High School or the STEM shooting. Those are horrific, and we do everything we can to prevent and mitigate those situations. But quite more frequently that people don't usually hear about are the number of suicide interventions that we're able to complete because of someone trusted an officer enough to tell them some information about someone they were concerned about. And then there's processes in place where we can work with the school districts to do a positive interaction or intervention with kids that are in trouble and help them, stay safe. And then there's just the regular situations on a day-to-day basis where if you see the SROs in the schools working with the kids, you would really have a true appreciation for that positive relationship. It's nice to go in there and just see the kids messing around with the officers and the officers, chatting it up with them. There are times where we do have to take enforcement action. Thankfully, they're very limited, and we work with the schools to do alternative methods other than, some sort of criminal violation. Sometimes we have no choice, but often we do. And the school district has a wonderful internal discipline policy that they can follow. But really, it's all about having the right officer for that job. And because we don't want to put the wrong officer in there and then have problems with, authority and it'd be a negative situation. It'd be very damaging. So we involve the school districts and the community in picking those officers. And if the school doesn't like that officer, they don't go in that school. And but we're very fortunate. We have a good, positive relationship with Littleton Public Schools. They promote safety, but more importantly, I think they promote those positive relationships which help our youth.
All right, we're going to go to another web question. This one from Christine, who lives in the downtown Littleton area. She asks, what does LPD do or plan to do about the use of illegal fireworks within the city limits? Would they consider educating residents that all personal fireworks are illegal in advance of summer holidays?
Yeah, fireworks, the bane of my existence. Yes. I feel your pain on the fireworks, and I wish that there was a way that we could do something more than what we can do. I mean, we can take enforcement action. It's challenging when the whole block is detonating, for lack of a better term. And obviously it's worse always around the 4th of July, and I truly understand the frustration. We get a lot of complaints on fireworks. We do the best that we can getting out there and warning people, and then as a last resort, we'll take enforcement action. It's just a challenging no-win situation all the way around, and we really try to do our best. I think there's been a lot of education. I think most people know that anything that leaves the ground and most things that don't leave the ground are illegal. And, with fire bans and whatnot, it's more complicated every year. But we'll continue to try to do our best on that and hope. I think part of the challenge this year, unique to this year, was the number of professional shows that were canceled. So I think a lot of people put on their own professional show on their cul-de-sac, and that caused a lot of problems. But we'll try to do better.
All right, let's go to the phone. We have Mike, who lives in the Mountain View neighborhood. Mike, please ask your question now.
Yes, thank you. Chief, I was wondering about, does the Littleton Police Department have a clearly defined rules of engagement in the event of civil unrest? I would expect that it would assess a first priority of preventing any person-on-person violence, and second, any damage to property.
maybe you read our policy, but we have a standard operating procedure that covers, again, keeping in mind that these things are very fluid, that they change, rapidly evolving situations. So no single policy or practice can really cover every scenario, but you're right. Basically, our first priority is protection of life, followed by the protection of property, right? So we want to always keep everyone safe and then assess the situation, and based on whatever is happening around us will dictate what tactics we're using. But we are trained, and we do have policies and procedures, including our use of force policy, and we do have a civil unrest policy that dictate how we respond to those situations.
All right, let's go to an online question. This one from Jeannie. Will you arrest someone for not wearing a mask in public place that has posted that one is required?
That's a very timely question too, obviously. So given the pandemic and the restrictions that are changing quite often, and I think we're seeing more across the country and in Colorado and now in Tri-County Health area, including the city of Littleton, mask mandates that are kind of expanding. And part of our role, let me just first off say that law enforcement is not the primary enforcer of those mandates. It's the health department. So nor do we want to be the primary enforcers of those, I can tell you that. However, we are good ambassadors, I think, for reminding folks that masks are required. That will be our response almost always is if you don't mind, please, wear a mask. There's a mandate. And I think most people will respond well to that. It's hard for us to do when our officers are not wearing the masks, though, from an earlier question. So, we have to model proper behavior as well. But I don't like the masks. I think they're not comfortable. They're a pain. But, we need to do what we need to do to protect each other. And we'll get through this. And our primary response on the mask thing will be to politely advise people they should be wearing them.
All right. I just remind people on the phone to press *3 if you'd like to get in the queue to ask a question live. We're going to go to the phone again. This is Dan from the Ridgeview neighborhood. Dan, go ahead with your question.
Good evening, Chief. Thank you for doing this, for one. I think there's a lot of agencies out here that would not want to be in your situation right now, taking questions from citizens. However, my question is, it's been theorized that one of the best and possibly worst things that ever happens to police officers is to put them in a vehicle with a radio. While this vastly increases response time to emergencies, it also tends to isolate the officers from their community. Would the Littleton Police Department ever consider requiring officers to spend a particular amount of time or prescribed amount of time outside of their vehicles, interacting with the community, talking to business owners, talking to patrons of businesses, knocking on even knocking on neighborhood doors? This would be something that every officer would do, not just a special squad. Additionally, would the city or the Littleton Police Department ever be willing to have a citizen advisory commission to assist in policy crafting? Thank you.
Great questions. And, I love where you're going with that. You're right. I think that, as law enforcement has evolved over time, it went from the officer on the foot beat to the patrol car, and I think a lot of that went as the officers on the foot beat got into the cars, you saw less officers because an officer in a car can handle more calls than a person on a foot beat. So what came with that? That was the decrease in personal contact, right? Where officers became responders rather than proactive, community greeters and everything. So I loved when I was on the street in patrol, I loved being on foot, and I liked going and talking to folks, and it was great. Unfortunately, the reality of the situation is, as I stated earlier, with 53,000 calls for service that we go on, our officers are very busy. Even in a low-crime community like ours, our officers are fairly busy. So I can't say that I would ever mandate a policy where they would have to have a certain amount of time out of their cars. I can tell you we do highly encourage officers to do that, to get out and talk and meet with people and talk with people as much as possible. While I don't restrict that to proactive units, like we have what we call the Special Enforcement Team, which is a community-based team as well. They're the officers you'll see mostly on bikes, and we have an ATV out in the parks and on the trails. But I love seeing the officers on the bikes. I think they're very approachable. I think it really helps develop positive relationships with the community, much softer approach for us. So, I really like seeing those officers out there. And I know our officers, the ones working the patrol cars as well, love getting out on foot, talking with folks as best they can. And I think you see that in the support that we have from the Littleton community. Our officers are very well supported, and I think it's because of that. I know it's because of the decades and decades of work that the men and women of Littleton Police Department have done in the past and currently to promote that relationship in those manners. And the second part of the question, community advisement panel. Thank you. Good question. I knew I brought you two for some reason. Yeah, thank you. Great question, too. And I was previously an officer in a larger jurisdiction just north of here that rhymes with Schrenver. And they had a community advisory panels, and I like them, and I think they're beneficial. We don't have a formal opportunity for that yet here in Littleton, but what we do have, and we have had for years, is our tremendously wonderful Littleton Police Citizens Academy Alumni Association, which is a mouthful, so we just call it the LPCAA. And they laugh at that. No one else does. But anyway, we have over 100 members of that, active members of that organization who are involved in the daily operations of Littleton Police Department. As a matter of fact, those folks volunteered over 7,000 hours of volunteer time to our organization last year alone. And we involve them in interviews for our special assignments, for our detectives ranks, for things like that, for promotions. We have used them. When I became chief here in 2013, we rewrote the entire discipline policy, and we put a committee together involving, and it had citizen community members on that as well. So I value it. I think it's important. We utilize them as best we can. If you want an opportunity to contribute to that, you can attend one of our 2 citizens academies we have each year. They're 10 weeks long. We usually run them in the spring and fall. Unfortunately, we're on COVID break right now, so as soon as we can, we'll get those back up and running. And that's a great opportunity to get a very detailed look inside the police department and to become more involved in how we manage our operations.
All right, we're going to go to another phone caller. Next up is Joyce. Joyce lives in the Deer Creek neighborhood. Joyce, go ahead with your call, please.
Hi, I really don't have a question. I just want to let you know how much I appreciate that all you've been doing, and I feel really bad for all the bad publicity that you're all getting. And I know all of my neighbors are 100% behind the police department, and because we've talked about it. And I just want to let you know you guys are doing a great job, and we do support you.
Thank you, Joyce. I can't tell you how important that is to the men and women of our department. You know, hearing that and being so fortunate to work in Littleton, where we get that a lot. So it's very challenging. And like I said, I've been a police officer for nearly 30 years now, and I've never been more depressed and down about my profession than I have been in the last, couple months. And I think it's just because, the negativity that's out there, and you just get it blasted at you and blasted. And then I come to work here in Littleton, and it's just nothing but support. There's lots of food, so I'm getting fatter. But folks are bringing in food and cards and letters and things like that, Joyce. So you're one of the reasons that our officers, they're very positive. They stay and remain upbeat, and it's very important for their wellness and their mental health, because this is a very challenging and mentally exhausting job. But the support that you all provide to us and the men and women in this organization it's invaluable. And so just thank you very much. You allow them to do what they do.
Our next question is from the website. It is from Jim. Jim says, we had been told by some city officials that the police would respond within 2 to 3 minutes of a break-in at the gun store in South Park area. That seemed not to happen a couple weeks ago. Can you explain what is the police response time for such a situation?
Response times vary. I can tell you in that specific incident, we were there within 3 minutes of notification of the call. So the issue became when we were notified of the call. So I can't always promise that. I can never promise a specific response time to any type of call. Obviously, our officers are aware of high-profile locations in our city. The particular location we're talking about, probably, our officers had been there 24 times in the previous 30 days on what we call extra or directed patrol, where our officers were visible at that location in an effort to prevent any type of crime. So just being extra patrol in that area, so 24 times in 30 days is pretty good, extremely high compared to what we do for other locations. And we were there very quickly. The burglary in question occurred in less than 2 minutes, so it was a very challenging situation.
All right, let's go back to the phone. We have Colleen. She lives in the Stern Park neighborhood. Colleen, go ahead with your question.
It really wasn't a question. I just wanted to say, you guys have gotten a bad rap here recently, and I don't think that your department has anything or has any part of that at all. I've lived in this area for over 30 years, and almost in the same neighborhood for 25 years, and I have had nothing but security, confidence in our government, and every aspect of our government, and as far as the police department, nothing but support. And so my thing is, I just wanted to say that to you because I don't think in this time that you hear it enough. But as I've heard in the previous comments, that you are hearing it, and that makes me feel really good. That's what to say.
So much, and again, we just truly appreciate that. We get that a lot, but never enough, because we all love being praised, right? So thank you for that and for the whole community for reaching out and supporting our officers. That being said, I think this is a great opportunity for us. We do have a great, amazing department built on, like I said, decades and decades of professional work by officers that came before us. And now it's our turn to continue with that professionalism and building that nourishing that relationship we have with the community. So I think this is a good opportunity for us just to, again, like all good organizations, to continually take an internal look at what we're doing and identify there's always things we can do better. And I think this is helping us to identify what we can do better. And I think when we come out of this, I think we'll be a better organization, and I think we'll do even more for our community.
Chief, why don't you talk about CALEA a little bit? I think that's an issue that we probably need to raise with the community.
City manager was asking me about our accreditation. So we're very proud to say that the Littleton Police Department is a nationally accredited agency through the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. We like acronyms in government, so that's CALEA. CALEA is an international agency, actually. There's approximately 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States, of which less than 10% of those are CALEA accredited. It's very demanding and challenging. Accreditation demands that we as an organization comply with over 380 national best practices and standards in law enforcement practices. Everything we do, from some of the civil disturbance stuff we were hearing about tonight to parking control. I mean, you name it, it's regulated, and we have a best practice for it, and our policies need to reflect that. As part of our accreditation, we're required to prove that we comply with these. We can't just show them our policies and say, look, we have the policy. We got to show that we actually do it. We have to show it every year. So we're subject to annual random audits where they go through 20%, 25% of our policies and procedures and proofs, the proofs that we actually did what we say we did. We never know what they're going to be. They're just going to hit us for 25%. We better have proof that we did it or we're in trouble. So we do that annually, and then every 4 years we have an on-site audit or inspection where we are very thoroughly reviewed by law enforcement professionals from throughout the country who come in and they look at everything we do. We have proofs for all 380 plus standards that we have. There's public hearings where we come in and folks can give feedback on our operations. So CALEA, I think, is a wonderful opportunity for us as an organization to maintain that constant look at what we're doing so that we can stay up to date on standards and best practices in our profession. And it compels us to do that because I can tell you we can get lazy, right? If we have so many standards and policies and we don't have someone that's just able all the time to stay up to date on them, it can become a challenge and we can forget things and things can get left out. And not on purpose, it can just happen. But CALEA allows us to maintain a vigilance over that and provides oversight of what we do and also transparency of what we do.
A couple of reminders. If you're watching on cable TV on Channel 8 and you'd like to get on the phone, you can dial 877-229-8493 and then enter the PIN number 116779. If you are on the phone and listening but would like to watch it on your phone, you can choose *8. And you'll be able to watch you can click on that link and you'll be able to watch it on your phone as well. Keep the questions coming. These are great. I'm going to go next to a web question from Patricia. She says, do you know how many protests, marches have occurred in Littleton recently regarding the current events? And have any of them turned violent or become riots?
So we haven't had any violent protests occur in Littleton. We've been very fortunate, and I think that speaks volumes to the Littleton community and the cohesiveness and support that they offer for all people. And we did have an incident, not an incident, but a scheduled march, a support march for social change that occurred a couple of weeks ago now. And it was kind of a really interesting and unique experience for us as a law enforcement and for our community. The organizer, we coordinated ahead of time with the organizer when they made us aware of the march they were going to have, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to provide traffic safety to make sure that folks could march peacefully and stay safe. Last thing we want is anybody to get hit by a car, right? So we coordinated with them ahead of time. They told us they expected maybe 75, 80 people, so we made plans to try to keep them on the sidewalk, but be prepared just in case the crowd grew a little bit. It was amazing. By the end of it, there were over 1,000 people in that march, and they walked up some of our most prominent streets, up Prince Street, and then across over to the courthouse, where they had a peaceful demonstration or discussions, and it was a really positive event. And I was there that night, and I was standing on a traffic post, and I can't tell you the number of people that came by, and I didn't know what to expect, because you get all this stuff in the media about how angry everybody is and how anti-police they are, but that was not what we experienced here. 1,000 people, they were as families. They were so nice, thanked us for what we did, encouraged us to keep open minds and to improve our own practices, which we totally support. So we've been very fortunate that one event is a big event, and but it was ran very well by the organizers, and we were lucky and that we were able to provide safety services for them during that event.
Elizabeth, you have been waiting patiently for quite a while, so we're going to go to you on the phone. Please go ahead with your question.
I don't have a question. I just want to tell the chief how grateful I am for the police. I live in a Columbine Manor area, and we feel so safe over here. The police once in a while patrols our streets, and I'm just very happy that we have the police department that is standing with us, and I'm standing with them. I salute them. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you once again. We totally appreciate that, and thanks for being such a great neighbor over in Columbine Manor.
Let's go to a web question. Sam is back. Hi, Sam. When hiring police officers, what or who do you look for in an applicant? Is the department ethnically and gender diverse?
So, yeah, we have the same challenges as other law enforcement agencies in trying to identify, the best possible people. And we do our very best to recruit and hire and retain officers and civilian personnel that reflect our community. And so we do everything we can to identify those folks. And we have a very rigorous hiring process. We're not unique for law enforcement. All law enforcement has similar, at least in this part of the country, has similar process. And it's very timely and time-consuming. The process can go from application to an officer being on their own on the street ready to handle calls without a training officer can take over a year on average. And there's a number of steps involved in that, from initial testing to psychological testing to polygraph to drug screenings to oral boards, physical tests, psychological screening. I can't remember, but I'm losing my mind, so maybe I should take one of those again. But and then they, that's before they even get into a 24, 26-week academy. After that, they're put into 14 weeks of field training where they have 3 different field instructors. After that, they do a year on probation with us before they're ever able to be a fully certified and ready to go on their own officer, where we have total confidence in their ability to do things without closer supervision.
All right, let's take another phone call. This time it's from Dave in the Meadowbrook neighborhood. Dave, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. We have several friends that are raising teenagers of color. They aren't living in Littleton, but one is. But numerous have had incidents where their kids have been pulled over without cause by police officers. In one case, a young woman was actually hit on twice by two different officers. Now, I'm not pointing the finger at Littleton because this happened outside, but this is part of the national narrative, and there is a problem in this case. I wanted to know that if something like this would happen in Littleton, and a citizen wanted to raise that question, do these kinds of things only get happened internally? Because the idea of total immunity is concerning for any organization that doesn't have some kind of outside review to help, police the police when that's necessary. So how do you handle those kinds of situations? What would cause you to say this requires an external review?
I understand your concern and your question, and it's not an uncommon concern or question, unfortunately, for our profession. And I know there's a lot of concern in our community for folks who, people of color or different genders or ethnicities, that feel as if the officers, in many cases, are stopping them without cause. And obviously, if you know someone or someone experiences that, we definitely want to know about that so that we can look into it. And we want to make sure that we're doing what we are properly and legally authorized to do, and then we're doing it in a professional manner. So you addressed a couple different things there. One is the potential unlawful stopping, and then another one was unprofessional manner of, stopping someone because she's cute or he's cute or whatever. And so a lot of times, I can't speak to those specific situations, but I can tell you based on my experience, including a stint in Denver as an internal affairs investigator, there are things that happen that are inappropriate. I'm not naive to that. So we definitely want to hear about that. Right now we have internal processes to investigate those things, but those internal processes are more transparent than they have been in the past. And one of the reasons for that is there is other legislation that was passed by the Colorado State Legislature that does open up certain internal affairs files that previously would have been closed. So my advice to folks is if you feel like you've been wronged in some way, don't sit and stew over it and wonder what to do. Please make whatever jurisdiction, make them aware of your concerns, and then don't give up. So if you're not getting the service or the response that you think you deserve, keep trying and keep working at it. And there's always someone above. There's someone above me, and he's sitting right to the left of me, and then there's someone above him, and they're sitting up here in the other part of the room. And there's always ears to listen, and there's always venues to let it be known. And I'm answerable to someone just like officers are answerable to me. So if you don't get the service that you expect from our officers, please let us know, and we'll do our best to investigate it to the best of our ability and to be transparent about it.
All right. Our next caller is Lily, who lives in the Broadmoor Estates area. Go ahead, Lily.
Luann. It's Luann, not Lily.
Sorry about that.
I just wanted to say I'm a strong proponent of supporting your local police and keeping them independent, reminding a council and you also that if you accept equipment from, say, the military, federal government, it comes with hooks. And we need to keep our police independent and locally controlled. Also, I want to thank you. Several times I've had to ask for help. I have a bipolar granddaughter, and sometimes things just got out of hand, and they have been fantastic with her. I know that they're not supposed to be social workers, and yet this has been kind of dumped on them. And I'm wondering, do you know of anything that's going to be positive where the police don't have to handle it and the mental health people should or would?
Let me start by saying, thank you for your support once again. We appreciate that. And I'm so pleased to hear about the good work that our officers have done helping you with your situation. And again, like I said earlier, I believe that, one of the positive things that can come out of what's happening now with our profession and across the country is I think there will be some opportunities here for expansion of other services to assist us with our responses to those social services or mental health type needs. And I'm interested to see where we go with that and where we are even a couple of years from now with especially like the social work type responses and those models that are available.
All right. Our next caller is John, who lives near Heritage High School. John, please go ahead.
Well, this is John, but I don't live near Heritage High School. Close to Kipling Boulevard. I don't believe any part of Kipling is in the city of Littleton. My question relates to jurisdiction. Doesn't Jefferson County Sheriff's Office have jurisdiction out here? Where does Littleton Police Department fall in that area?
Kipling is Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, but I drive Kipling all the time. I'll try to answer your question.
I think we lost John.
All right. Well, let me just comment on Kipling. There's a lot of traffic.
All right. Well, let's see. We have another question about traffic. So let's go ahead and go to that one. This is a web question from Mark. He says, I have noticed a lot of cars speeding in the city. Can you guys please increase patrols and crack down on the speeders, not just on Santa Fe?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Usually we hear the opposite of that. Can you stop writing us so many tickets? But yeah, we totally agree. And I think that, one of the units that we have within the police department is a proactive unit called the traffic unit. Their entire job is to handle proactive and reactive enforcement related to traffic-related incidents. So write tickets, provide education, and investigate accidents. So currently we have 5 officers assigned to traffic unit, and that's their job. And they do the best they can, given their other responsibilities with investigating accidents as well. And they do write as many tickets as they can. People ask me all the time, do you have a quota? And I'm like, no, they can write as many as they want. So, which John's probably the only guy that appreciates that. But we do, what I do, like, I've never been like a big traffic cop in my career. I've just done other things. But I do ask our officers that they concentrate areas on high accident intersections, number 1. Number 2 would be school zones. And number 3 would be safety and construction areas, where people are at a higher risk of getting injured, school zones and construction. And also on neighborhood complaints, specific areas where we get complaints. So if you're seeing an area that you specifically have some concerns about, please let us know, and we'll get some officers down there to do some proactive enforcement and do the best we can on that.
Okay, and a reminder to our callers, press *3 if you would like to ask a question live. Next online web question is from Ryan. He says, wanting to circle back to the relevant topic of open demonstration. While we understand the events are fluid, how are you coaching your team to identify when intervention is needed or when a peaceful protest can continue?
So that's kind of a challenging question, but let me take a shot at it. So a peaceful protest can continue as long as a peaceful protest needs to continue. I mean, there are some permit restrictions in some places. But, I think no one really has an argument with folks demonstrating peacefully and expressing their First Amendment, liberties. No one has a problem with that. Our job is to promote the peace, right, and protect life and property. And, sometimes we get feedback, negative feedback about why you here, why are the police here? And many times or always, we're there to monitor the situation. And in some cases, like in the march that we had through Littleton a few weeks ago, we were there to promote safety by keeping the marchers safe, by blocking off streets and traffic. And in other instances where the air of the demonstration may be a little bit more electric, let's say, where things can have a potential to maybe go bad, we'll be there to respond as necessary to, again, protect life and property. So hopefully that answers this question to a little bit. I know it's fairly generic, but again, there's no specific single answer that's good for this.
Okay. Let's go to Ron, who is in Stony Creek. Ron, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everyone for this opportunity to have this meeting. My real question is, what is the boundary line, or is there one, between Jefferson County jurisdiction and Littleton jurisdiction, since I have a Littleton address, but I also have a Jefferson County. I'm in Jefferson County, please. Thank you.
Question. I can tell you the number of times that I've been at home watching the news and I see a crime occur, and they're saying it's a Littleton address, and then I see the Jefferson County cars there, and I'm like, oh, phew, that's not really in the city of Littleton. But generically, it kind of varies, but for the most part, the line between Littleton and Jefferson County, where we would switch from Littleton Police Department to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, is along Platte Canyon, for the most part, on the west side of town. But it gets a little weird around the Coventry and stuff, goes all the way over to Sheridan, some of those neighborhoods. But for the most part, Platte Canyon is our western boundary, and then we butt up against Bomar on the west side, up on the north side of Littleton, if that helps.
Yeah, and hopefully that answered John's question too. I think that's what he was wondering about, because he lives near Kipling. Let's go to an online question from Josh. What is your department's policy regarding the use of police dogs?
So we are fortunate that we have a canine program in Littleton. An agency our size, it's a luxury to have a program like that. We have 2 canines, Bandit and Zahn. They're terrific dogs, very, 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 very highly trained. We're only really able to have a canine program based on the support of our community members. We have a wonderful organization called Friends of Littleton Canine. They're a 501c3. You should look them up. But anyway, they support us. They've purchased dogs for us. They spend tens of thousands of dollars supporting this program, and we're very thankful for that. Our police canines are what we call dual-purpose dogs. They are cross-trained to detect narcotics as well as patrol apprehension dogs. They can do a traditional apprehension and search for suspects. They enhance officer safety tremendously by we can send a dog into, let's say we have a large building where we have a burglary call and we believe someone may be inside. We can use dogs to search the building much quicker and safer than sending officers inside. Or narcotics intervention. We get some questions a lot lately. It's a very unique thing. Marijuana, right? So previous dogs that we have had have been trained because marijuana used to be illegal in Colorado. And so our dogs were trained for marijuana and then all other different types of drugs as well. And our 2 dogs we have now, and we started this with our most recent purchase after marijuana became legal. But both our dogs now are not trained, specifically not trained to detect marijuana, because we do not want to have one of our dogs alert on a substance that's legal in this state. So it kind of goes back to lawful detention and search and seizure law. We want to make sure that our dogs are alerting on truly illegal narcotics based on state law and federal law as far as marijuana. That's another different argument. But anyway, so our dogs, we do have policies on deployment of the dogs. We do have policies on what we need to do if the dogs do apprehend someone and someone's injured. They're very detailed, and they'll soon be on the internet for folks to take a look at if they choose to.
All right. Our next caller is Charlotte. Charlotte lives in Old Littleton. Charlotte, go ahead with your question.
Hi. I've lived in Littleton for 30 years, and in the last 10 years, there has been an inordinate amount of pollution. I mean, garbage just thrown out on the sides of the roads and all over Denver as well. And prior to 10 years, it was such a clean city and state. Is there any kind of signing in? I'm originally from New York, where we had the Don't Pollute, Give a Hoot campaign, or $1,000 for catching somebody who has thrown garbage out the window. It seems to just be getting worse and worse.
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably more suited for other folks than me, but there are some things there that we can address. Number one is if anybody sees any folks, one of the challenges we have is illegal dumping, right? So you see people dumping mattresses or TVs or whatever along the side of the road or at a vacant property. We'd like to know about that as soon as possible because we can't take enforcement action against that type of behavior. Some of the other individual things that you're demonstrating in the educational campaign you're talking about are better addressed toward our elected officials and our public works folks. And we'll definitely pass that on and make sure they're aware of that and work together to try to reduce that problem.
Okay, our next caller is Ellie. Ellie lives in the West Meadows neighborhood. Go ahead, Ellie.
Hi, thank you for having this meeting with us. My question has to do with the homeless. We went to dinner in Littleton, and I saw over by the Melting Pot parking lot, there's some homeless people living in that area. And I also noticed there's homes right to the back of where these people are living. There's only a fence separating it. And I'm just wondering what Littleton can do about, like, what can the police do about requesting people to move? I know my son he runs in the Bear Creek area, and the smell there, he said, is just getting worse and worse. And then the other day, a man came up and just started ranting at him, and he wasn't sure if the man was going to attack him or just continue to rant, and he just avoided the situation. But it just seems to be coming out this way other than just downtown Denver.
Thank you. Yeah, we are hearing more and more about these types of problems, and there's a couple different things that we can do. Littleton, we do have some ordinances that prohibit the erection of structures, so that would limit the ability of folks to establish large-scale camps or even small camps. And we're very proactive in how we deal with that so that we don't end up with a situation like you see in some of our neighboring jurisdictions where the problem just gets so huge you can't manage it. So if you do see structures going up or places where you feel like folks are living, please let us know, and we'll work with our code enforcement folks to go in there and talk with individuals. We have a pretty positive relationship with most folks that are regulars in the Littleton neighborhoods, and so we know most of them. They're very cooperative, and if we tell them we're receiving complaints and they need to move along, they'll usually move along. If not, we can go through code enforcement and ourselves and work on removing those properties after proper notice. But I think this is a good example of an opportunity here to talk about our co-responder program with our partnership with All Health Network. They're not just mental health professionals, but they also a tremendous conduit to other types of services, whether that be housing or food or what other types of services that folks, homeless folks especially, are often in need of. And when we use our co-responders and they're out there with us, they'll go on those types of calls with us, and they'll develop relationships as well with individuals who may need immediate assistance or may need longer-term assistance. And that's a great example of how we can partner with the private sector and All Health Network to provide some of those longer-term solutions to folks who are willing to accept that type of help. So let us know. And again, on the folks that are, you gave the example of the person running and they had a person who was being disruptive. Please let us know about that as soon as you can. It's probably not the only individual that they've bothered or been disruptive towards, so we'd like to know about that so we can get out there and contact those folks as well.
Let me add something here. Let me just make another comment here on the homelessness. I think, as the chief mentioned here, we are seeing more calls for service related to that. We also have the three cities of Inglewood, Littleton, and Sheridan. We meet regularly to talk about several things, one of which is homelessness. And the three councils from those cities decided to put together a task force, and for which our chief participates in that, and certainly the city manager's office here in Littleton. The purpose of that is trying to get a better understanding of what do we really have as far as a homeless problem? How many people do we have? Because obviously they tend to look at the river corridor as one of their major kind of routes, and for them to, to live perhaps. And so the purpose of that is also for this group is to look for perhaps strategies and common policies for us to kind of help manage that. Ultimately, it's also to try to connect the homeless with the right resources. And as the chief keeps reiterating here, is it's not necessarily the police department, so we're looking for other resources. And I think we've learned a lot here in the past year through this Tri-City group. In fact, I think we're looking to report out here to both council, or all councils of these 3 cities here later this fall.
We've come to our scheduled closing time, but since we did get a late start and we have several more questions that are online web questions, I think we should go ahead and address those questions, and then we'll conclude our event. One is from Aaron, which touches on what you might have just spoke about, Chief. How much funding goes to programs like the mental health co-responders? Could more resources be shifted to that and other community-oriented programs?
Great question, and I think that's also a very timely topic across the nation. You're seeing a lot more awareness of these types of situations that commingle with law enforcement. So our co-responder program has been expanded recently with the support of City Council. In this budget cycle for 2020, we doubled the number of hours that our co-responders were on the street with us. Thanks to that funding by council. We had also obtained a state grant that helped provide some of the funding for that program. We continually evaluate that program to see what we can do and what our needs are there, whether it requires expansion or not, and whether that's at this time or in the future. We'll continue to look at that. And then I think that you're going to see, as I talked about several different times tonight, that there may be offshoots of that type of program, that it could involve other types of social services, and we may see some of that as well. So funding, there's always some competition there for funds, but I know that our council and our city manager has been very supportive. Our community is supportive of that. We've always received the funding that we've needed to expand these programs. They're very valuable. I think everybody sees the importance of these programs, and we'll continue to evaluate them.
Sam is asking what changes have been made to the department's use of force policy since the passing of Senate Bill 217.
Great question, Sam. That's another one of those state legislated changes. We did update our policy effective immediately upon passage. We had been working on it in anticipation of some of the language changes that were required in there. We really didn't have to change too much substantially because our policy was already fairly comprehensive and covered everything that was in the bill. There's some things in there that are a little different. So we did update that language to be more reflective of the state legislation. The main change, though, and it's an interesting one, there's a ban on chokeholds. There's nuanced differences between what is a chokehold and what is a carotid neck restraint. They're different things, but most people don't understand it. It's too complicated to get in here. We did previously allow for what we call the carotid neck restraint in Littleton, where it temporarily restricts the blood flow and causes temporary unconsciousness. We allowed that and we trained our officers in that technique, but we classified that as a deadly force technique. So it was the same on the deadly force scale as using a firearm against someone. I thought it was important, and I intended to keep that in our policy and keep training our officers on that, because if our officers are fighting for their life or to protect the lives of someone else, and they have an option to shoot someone or to apply this technique to them, where the 9 times out of 10 they will recover instantly and have no long-term damage, I would prefer that they would be able to do the carotid neck restraint. But I can see where people are concerned with that. There was no room for us to keep that in there, even though we had it as a deadly force option and no less than deadly force. So that's one situation where I think the legislation goes too far, and that restricting tactics of police gets dangerous, in my opinion, because in a situation like that, like the example that I gave, the officer that would be trained in a proper application of that technique now has limited options when it comes to deadly force. So one example of the policy change that we had to remove that from our policy because of the law. I supported that technique based on that restriction that it was deadly force. But other than that, just language changes. It's pretty comprehensive. That will be posted soon on the internet for folks to see, and it's a policy we're very proud of.
All right. Casey asks, how do you intend to interact with police unions if in the circumstance an officer breaks the law, e.g. excessive force towards people in marginalized and minority communities?
So I can tell you first off that no officer, I don't care, anyone in our agency would support someone who breaks the law, right? We're not supportive of officers who use excessive force, unnecessary force. It makes us all look horrible, and you can see what it's done to our profession. One of the things I think is the most disturbing and troubling for me as a 30-year law enforcement professional is to see the damage that can be done. It can take decades and decades and decades for our officers to do professional policing and be respectful and courteous and do everything right, and it can be torn down in seconds by some officer doing something totally inappropriate in another state somewhere. So that's very challenging and very difficult. As far as the police unions go, we have a very positive relationship with our Officers Association here, and we meet regularly, and they represent, the concerns of the officers, and then I work with the city management to make sure those concerns are addressed in a positive manner. They're very receptive, and we've had to discipline and take some pretty serious discipline against officers for different policy violations in the past, and they totally support that, given the fact that we have a very thorough, very impartial investigations process. So we have had no problems in Littleton with our Officers Association. I can't say that's the same for other places, but for here, we're good.
All right, we started our evening with a question from Sam, and I think we're going to end our evening with a question from Sam. What does training look like for LPD? How many hours? What does that look like in comparison to other departments in the state and the U.S.?
So another program we're very, very proud of is our training. I've always loved training personally. I think it's imperative that just like our policies can get stale, our tactics can get stale, and our brains can get stale. And I've always been a proponent of continuing education and continuing learning throughout my life. And so being the chief is kind of cool. I can make sure that our culture supports that. We have tremendous support and funding through City Council to have a good training budget in our agency. And it's reflected in our hours of training and in the diversity of our training. We have structured our patrol shifts so we work 410s in patrol, and which I talk about patrol, but our whole organization has opportunities to do the same thing. But our Wednesday is an overlap day for our organization, which means every patrol officer works on Wednesday, every Wednesday. And we use those Wednesdays for training days for our people, which builds in training capacity for our organization far beyond what a lot of agencies have. The state requires 24 hours of in-service training per officer per year. Our Littleton officers receive well over 100 hours per year in training, and oftentimes much more than that, and it's a variety of subjects. Based on the ability of us to have that training schedule in place and the overlap day, and then the funding that we have available through the City Council to provide that training for officers. And it was interesting when the George Floyd tragedy occurred, and then you saw a lot of outcry for diversity training and implicit bias training. And in addition to what the police department does, the city of Littleton also does a great job with training employees, all employees throughout the city. And we had just, as part of the city of Littleton employees training, gone through a pretty extensive online implicit bias training for every city employee, including all police officers, prior to the George Floyd tragedy. So very timely, very appropriate, and recurrent training, and we're very proud of it.
All right. Mark or Chief Stevens, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to add?
I'll say maybe just a few things, and Chief, I'll let you maybe add to it if you'd like. I too have been part of local government for over 30 years, and I've enjoyed a pretty positive relationship in every city I've ever been in with the police department. But I think I'm most proud of the city of Littleton. I think the chief is correct when he talks about a very positive culture that he and the command staff have nurtured. I think the relationship that the city has with the police association is perhaps one of the most constructive I've ever been associated with. I also would say that the level of interest on the part of City Council historically has been very deep. I think we all recognize that perhaps the most important service that any city can provide to its citizens is the police service. That's not to say that we don't have something to learn. I think that's the purpose of this telephone town hall, is an opportunity for people to ask questions. I think, I hope you heard tonight that Chief Stevens and certainly the entire department is open to comments and looks for opportunities for improvement. And so with that, I would really just like to thank our chief and the command staff here this evening for agreeing to do this. This was, quite honestly, at my request on the city council, that we just have an opportunity just based on current events. I hope our citizens had an opportunity to participate and enjoy this. And I know that our city council is going to spend some time next week debriefing this telephone town hall. And unless there's anything else, Chief?
So again, I'd just like to say thank you for this opportunity. A lot of people were asking me before this, are you worried? Are you nervous? I'm like, no, I'm not. I've done this a lot with Littleton community members, and they're always amazing, very respectful, and they ask amazing questions. They're very educated and on what we do and what society wants. And so we really appreciate the opportunity to share information. Again, you know, don't rely on other sources when you can come to the main source, you know, on what we do and what we're thinking and what we're operating on. So toward that end, again, thank you to everyone. And again, I cannot say enough about the support that our community offers our officers. And it gives us that support gives us the legitimacy to do our jobs. And without that support, we would be unable to do so. And I think you'll see that in other places. And thank goodness we don't have that here. And I want to thank the men and women of the Littleton Police Department for the amazing job they do every day and every night. And they're always there. They're always willing to help. And we will do everything we can to nourish that relationship we have with our community, which allows us to do what we do. And they are true professionals, and I'm proud of each and every one of them. And then also, I just want to let everyone know that I'm guessing there are quite a few people who did not get their questions answered. Since day one of this national awareness that has occurred, I've received many emails. I will respond to every single one personally. So if you have questions that you did not get answered, that you want answered, I will make this promise to you that I will answer each one of your emails personally. Just send them. You can link to me through our website. I can be found on there. That's probably the easiest way to do it. Send me an email. If I get a ton of them, it's going to take me a little while to respond. But you know what? That's my job. And anything I can do to increase transparency for what we do, anything I can do to provide the tools and training and culture that our officers need to succeed, we'll do it. And if what we did here tonight and what I can do in the future to promote our profession, we'll do. So thank you, everyone, for taking the opportunity to talk with me. And thank you, Andy Smith, Division Chief, for your incredible input tonight. Gene, always. Yes, thank you. So thank you.
Thank you all. We had more than 600 people join us at some point during the last hour and a half, so I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us. The chief mentioned you can reach him by email. You can also leave a message at Littleton Town Hall, or you can send an email to littletontownhall.org, or you can leave a message at 303-795-3811. We'll be checking both of those in case you thought of something later on that you'd like to know about. The City Council has scheduled a study session for July 21st to talk more about your comments this evening, so stay tuned for that on Cable Channel 8. We'll host more of these events in the future to keep you informed. I want to thank you again and have a great evening.